I'm going to introduce the panelists and maybe get them to talk a little bit about themselves. It's been a really interesting week, and I think next week is going to be another interesting week here in Canada as the CRTC Let's Talk hearings go on in Ottawa. I'm going to get to that in a second, just to sort of go through some of the perceptions, the headlines, the fears, the questions that are coming out of that, and try and put that into some sort of context. And I think, you know, as a producer who's primarily made feature films, television is a relatively new enterprise, and I think maybe, you know, I'm going to play neophyte up here on the panel and ask all sorts of maybe inappropriate questions, but hopefully we can, you know, get a little bit of light from these guests who are very skilled in their own way. First of all, I'm going to introduce Chris Skinner, who is from CTV Digital. Chris is a media executive with more than 15 years digital experience, currently heading digital for CTV at Bell Media. Chris oversees digital strategy and roadmaps for some of Canada's top programs, including The Amazing Race, MasterChef, the Juno Awards, Saving Hope, and many more. Thanks for doing this, Chris. From the United States, we have Faye Wells. I met Faye at TIFF last year when she was working under the umbrella of Netflix. Faye is currently an independent contractor, primarily advising media companies on content acquisition, sales, and revenue optimization strategies. Previously, she was the director of content acquisitions at Netflix, focused on global acquisition of independent films and television. As well, she worked for Disney and ESPN media networks along the way. Thank you. And Stephen Finney. You all know Stephen. He is production executive, original content, Shaw Media. Currently, he is overseeing development of both half-hour comedies and one-hour dramas, and he is the Shaw production executive responsible for all creative matters connected to Lost Girl and Continuum. I believe we also have Greg Rubidge, who will be giving us a little bit of perspective from the point of view of film and television distribution company. So let's start in, guys. I know that Stephen and Chris are familiar with what's been going on at the CRTC. I think a lot of the trends that are coming out of there are things that you're probably familiar with, Faye. So some of the headlines I've seen. First one, more and more consumers are cutting the cord. Internet TV is replacing linear TV. Apps are replacing channels, remote controls are disappearing, and there are a number of screens proliferating in a number of different ways. And then the big one for me that I've noticed is that binge watching is replacing appointment television. I like to sit and watch 6 hours of TV at a time, and then I leave it for a week, and then I come back and I watch 6 more hours, you know? So I am very curious to know, first of all, how do you address the notion that consumers are cutting the cord?
Okay.
Stephen?
Sure. Can you all hear me? Okay, so the cord cutting thing is something that we think about every day, of course. Mm-hmm. And the headline is, it's almost a little misleading. So everybody is talking about how people are cutting the cord, they're cutting the cord. But in actual fact, that's only about, right now, about 5% of cable customers and video consumers in Canada. So what we're finding is, yes, that is true, but also people are consuming more and more video all the time, mm-hmm. and they're watching it on their TV, they're watching it through cable, over the internet, on their mobile devices. So we believe people are also, they're not just cutting the cord, but they're also stackers. So people who say subscribe to Netflix, mm-hmm. they're also, that's not their only service. So they might do Netflix and Apple TV, or they'll do Netflix on top of their cable subscriptions. And that's about 80% of Netflix subscribers in Canada. So yes, it's true, mm-hmm. and yes, we're concerned about it, but we feel like It's almost like a panic phrase that everybody's using in the industry, and it's maybe a slight hyperbole, but it's something to be considered. Yeah.
It's still something that is trending right now, and
Yeah.
it does seem like, there are more and more people that are claiming to cut the cord,
Yeah.
year over year.
Yeah.
Can you give us a U.S. perspective on that?
Absolutely. Can you guys hear me okay? Now a little bit better?
Yes.
Okay, so I would agree with Stephen in that it's definitely happening in lesser numbers than kind of what the panics that's going throughout the industry. I think the other two things that are kind of going on in the U.S. is cord shaving. So people just saying, okay, I'm not going to have this premium package. I'm going to have my basic or my expanded basic. And then there's a little bit of an increase of cord nevers. So these are kind of younger millennials or people who are digital only who've never actually subscribed to cable. And so I think, again, I agree with what Stephen has said, but I think the opportunity on that side is as folks are kind of turning more towards digital and looking to consume their content elsewhere, that there's a lot of opportunity, obviously, for increased content and increased viewing.
I would say, just to provide the full consensus, we're seeing the same thing. Where we've seen that cable subscriptions have either gone flat or slightly down for television, the data is clear that consumers are actually watching more and more video content. So to me, what that says is there's still a demand, there's a growing demand for this kind of content. We just need to figure out how to deliver it.
Okay. Is internet TV actually replacing linear TV? I see a lot of networks are starting apps of their own. I'm wondering, how does that play in the space?
I think, for us, we launched our first foray into that was our TV Everywhere product, launched late last year. And so the kind of thing where you can watch CTV, CTV2 on your app, tablet, smartphone, and take it with you, provided that you have a cable subscription. And so that's the first step into the space. But I think at some point we stop thinking about television as the content. Television, in my mind, is the appliance that sits in your living room. And we just start thinking about screens and dumb screens and being able to deliver content to any one of those platforms. And it could be unlimited. It's not just a linear and the restrictions and the constraints of linear television, but providing deep libraries of VOD content over the internet.
I've been to those libraries. They
Yeah.
can be pretty gruesome.
Yeah.
Navigating your way through. I think, I'm interested to hear your perspective as well, Faye, on that.
Sure. I mean, I agree. I don't think that linear television is being replaced by what's going on digitally. And I think in the U.S. what you've seen is some of the broadcasters really try to use linear offerings to supplement what's going on, or just use digital offerings to supplement what's going on linear. I mean, I was telling Damon, I was telling the panel, in the 3 weeks kind of leading up to this event, I pulled basically a bunch of deals that have digital and linear components and found that, in the last 3 weeks there have been 20-something odd deals, and at least 3 or 4 of those were folks who were putting content on digital as a supplement to linear, or using stuff to premiere and digital before linear. So for example, ABC has a show called A to Z that's coming on, and they're doing digital premiere 7 weeks before they're doing linear. And then there are a couple of other broadcasters that are premiering digital kind of supplements. So they'll have a show. There's one called A to Z that premieres on AMC, but they have a little digital show where they do 6 or 7 episodes to kind of promote what's going on the linear channel. So I think there's this idea of how do we play together versus, digital is going to kind of take over what's going on linear.
So in a way, digital can actually lead you back to traditional broadcast.
Absolutely.
Right.
That's what we hope. Yeah, so Shaw has been very focused the last few years, so we also have apps, and there's the Global Go app, Showcase Go, History Go. We also have, VOD. We do stream all our shows, all our original shows on our websites. So the opportunity is there. If you miss it, or if you don't PVR it, you can catch that episode virtually anywhere on any of our digital platforms. And that's the hope, is that you're going to catch up and hopefully go back to the linear. And our focus is on commissioning stuff for TV.
Right.
Yeah.
Here's one of the trends that was also being discussed this week. consumers are becoming more and more digitally engaged, using Facebook, YouTube, email, tablets on a daily basis. These folks are digitally savvy, and especially younger consumers are feeling that they don't really need to pay for content. How do we cope with that as content creators, but also as broadcasters in this age?
That's a good question. That's actually one of my big bugaboos, is because, you know, you wouldn't walk into a bookstore and pick up a book and just walk away with it. And I mean, people own these properties. People pay a lot of money to create these shows. And for some reason, because it magically appears in your home, you think you deserve it for free. So trying to get people to understand that this is not how the system is going to grow, and this is actually hurting the system to take it like that. I also believe that all these people who are taking it for free, they're young, so they're on very limited incomes. You know, they're finding their way in the world, and they're getting the content that they want to watch. Eventually, we believe that they will start paying for it because they will want the better quality, they will want the better choices, they will, you know, they will, as they get older, they will become more sophisticated in their demands. So theoretically and hopefully that, you know, as they grow older, they will actually turn to legitimate ways of getting their content.
Are there any lessons that we've learned from, say, the music industry that could apply to our industry?
Yeah, I think, you know, what we've seen, if you look at the last 15, 20 years with the music industry and the, you know, what a lot of people would consider a crisis with the launch of Napster and those sort of peer-to-peer sharing technologies, the decline of CD sales, and then it evolved into, and Apple became a big player, and other streaming services like Pandora and Spotify and Songza. And so I think what we've seen with the music industry is one where the business is no longer, they don't rely strictly on CD sales anymore, and they have to find other sources of revenue and other ways to get to fans. But there seems to be now emerging and has emerged a viable business. It's by no means the same business as it was before, and digital hasn't replaced yet the kind of revenue that was there previously, like with CD sales. But at least, if for those of you who lived through the Napster period, to be here is somewhere that we couldn't envision during that time, and yet now there seems to be a whole business that couldn't have been conceived at the time. So I think at the end of the day, I'm with Stephen in that people will pay for good quality content. We just need to figure out how to make that work.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say I agree with both of them. I think one of the things that the video industry has done better than the music industry off the bat, right, is unbundled options. So one of the big challenges with music, right, was that you have to buy the entire CD, and I think that video is already ahead of that, and I agree in terms of kind of the quality, because as we also remember, you know, what was on digital used to be what was not good enough to get on television, and I think as people are kind of focusing more on budgets and things for, you know, creating great content online, I think people will be more willing to buy, and I think honestly consumers just need to be conditioned to buy that. You know, if you're going to have the same level and the same kind of quality of content that you're getting on television, then why wouldn't you pay for that content? You pay for it on television, so why wouldn't you pay for it online?
Yeah, and I think our content has to evolve. I mean, one of the questions that I have for you guys is around format, because traditionally as a content maker, we're taught to think in half-hour or one-hour blocks as it pertains to television. How is that evolving in the digital age?
So, like I said in the beginning, we initially, or primarily, commission for TV, so it's the strict, the half hour and the 1 hour. We do commission a few things for digital, so one of the shows that we did recently was called But I'm Chris Jericho, and what they did, it was funded through us and the IFP and Ontario Media Development Corporation. And so primarily what those are 8 to 10 to 12 minute episodes. The length of them varies, and it depends on what the episode needs, which is great. And they also have companion pieces which are a minute long or 2.5 minutes that focus on the secondary character. So it fills out, you know, the site. So there's a ton of content for them to go, fans to go to, check out, and move from one to another. They don't have to be watched in any sort of order, and you know, it's a little more free-flowing. And then what we're doing with those actual webisodes is the producers are taking them and they're recutting them into half-hour episodes, and we're going to test those on TV. So it was definitely a digital-first kind of initiative, and now we're going to test it on TV, see if it works. Probably in the winter or maybe early spring, but
Wow, that's
so it allows you to play a lot more. Yeah.
really interesting, almost like a reverse way of getting to traditional broadcast.
Exactly. I mean, we've taken, there was a web series called Pure Ownage that was very successful, and then they came to us and said, we want to make a TV show. And we said, sure, let's do that. And unfortunately, it was a fantastic show, but it didn't find an audience. It's a very niche concept. It's about gamers and all that stuff. And when we did it probably 5 years ago, gaming then, I mean, it was huge, but it still wasn't nearly as big as it is now. Mm-hmm. So, and then they've actually taken that concept back, and now they're making more webisodes and funding a feature film through Indiegogo. So it's going both ways now, yeah.
Interesting. I think I'm going to ask Greg to jump in right now, just from the perspective of how you're seeing content evolve, like the kinds of things that you're seeing that are working in a digital space. I think we have a room primarily filled with content creators here, so it might be really interesting to get your perspective on that.
For us right now, at least, you know, I know that there's a lot of discussions around making content for the web. You know, my view for the last 5 years is really stuff that's already been made for other media format, as Damon alluded to, in the half-hour, hour feature format, because that's kind of like what people have been used to, and it's just how the models are set up to buy it. There was really, up until, you know, a couple of years ago, there was really no model for short-form content. And then it's like, how long is a short? So we have some individual episodes from TV series that are like 25 minutes long, and we sell those and we can rent those. But if it's like 5 to 8 minutes, you know, nobody wants to undergo a transaction for that. So then that really leaves just an ad-supported model or a subscription video on demand model. And so we did pick up finally after, you know, like 4 years, the model's evolved, and we have a way to monetize it now. And it was a 5-minute 5-minute segments, and we packaged it not only as an hour-long piece that somebody could buy or rent for like $4, but we also broke out all the 5-minute episodes that we had, and you can put it on a site called Fandor, which is subscription video on demand, and they actually pay you based on streams, and they even go down to the second. On Amazon Prime, you get paid per stream, and on Hulu, it's ad-supported revenue. So most of the stuff that we buy or that we look at licensing is still a feature-length program or a TV program that you can sell in a buy or rental model. But like I said, now there is a way to monetize short-form content. As one-offs, it's very difficult, but as a series that somebody, actually, I'm just going to point out another an anomaly in the gorging phase is that on Hulu, I found whenever we've had just one series, and again, think of your own behavior when you guys watch stuff on Netflix or Hulu. When you have like one series, it's always under-indexed from a, you know, viewership and revenue perspective, as opposed to a series that's had like 5 or 6 seasons in it. And people, it's because of the, you know, the gorging factor. And people make an investment in something that they know there's several seasons of programming. It was a unique thing that we kind of discussed with Hulu, and it's stuck out from a revenue perspective when we launch it. But if you're making short-form content, again, one-offs are always difficult, so people make an investment in their time with something that they can become familiar and invested in with their time. So, anyway, did
Great,
that answer your
thanks.
question?
No, helpful. To pick up on that, I'm interested to talk to Faye a little bit about Netflix, the big red buyer of content. There seems to be a lot of mystery around the process, and I'm just wondering if you can maybe talk in broad strokes about the kinds of content that OTTs, both in the States and internationally, are looking for, and you know, what sort of advice you might be able to put out there to the content creators in the room.
Sure. So kind of broadly speaking, working at Netflix, one of the first things that they're looking for when acquiring content is how well is this content going to travel. So is this content going to work for people who are watching it in Canada? Is it going to work for people who are watching in the US? Is it going to work for people watching in the UK? So that's, I think, the first big kind of bucket that they tend to look at. And then, Netflix is very, I don't want to say secretive, but don't disclose a lot of information about the data that they have. But they do have a lot of data that they look at and make decisions on what other content to buy. And so a lot of that is based on, what existing content is kind of doing well on Netflix, and, how similar would new content be to that. So, I think you guys have probably seen from, some of the big announcement that Netflix is making, or some of the things they're investing in, dramas that are, kind of like crime dramas are doing well. I think there's a little bit of trying to figure out what's going to go on in the comedy space in terms of series and what's going to work well. And then I think there's a little bit of a factual reality, kind of what we call it, kind of does well. So that's the Mythbusters, not your Real Housewives type reality shows. So I know, just kind of broadly speaking, those are different kind of content buckets that have done well, and that people tend to look to acquire there.
And within the model of the OTT, there's been a lot of talk about, at some point, an OTT provider will hit a threshold.
Okay.
How does that model evolve? How do we sort of keep those companies going? How do they keep themselves going? Do we see Netflix breaking into like 4 or 5 different types of services where one is just family, one is comedy? Are those models that you're already starting to see in the States?
So when you say thresholds, you mean just thresholds in terms of like you max out on the people that are going to subscribe, and how do you keep them interested? And
yeah,
keep
exactly.
Them, yeah, I don't foresee different companies breaking out and like spinning out different services. I see them doing kind of what Hulu has done or is trying to do, and what Amazon is trying to do, and what Netflix is doing, is focusing on those categories that are doing really well. So, a Netflix example is just for kids, right? So kids content is viewed extremely well online, and so they have a section that's just for kids. And so if you can select a profile, and when you log on, all you're going to get is kids content. And you've seen, I don't know if you guys have seen, but Hulu is amping up their kind of buying in that space as well, and they're amping up what they're going to do with their platform. And I would say the same thing for Amazon. So I think what they're just really going to try to do is figure out what niches or genres work really well, and then provide an interface that kind of supports that to give people what they want. But I don't see them spinning off into kind of different businesses.
And how do Canadian content creators, or any content creator, best get their material considered for acquisition?
So I think it's a couple of ways. I think that the tough thing about that is, companies like Netflix and Amazon and Hulu are limited by resources. So you only have a certain number of buyers, and then you have a ton of people coming in. I think one of the ways is to kind of have unique, compelling content. The kids space, I know, particularly, is something that Netflix and Amazon have been looking at. So there's a good chance of trying to get a direct deal that way. But to be quite frankly, because of limited resources, a lot of times producers will have to go through aggregators. So it's a matter of finding who's the right aggregator that has a good relationship with some of those companies, and figuring out how to work with them. I think that's kind of the way it goes.
And in Canada, how do producers find their way into acquisitions or development with our networks?
Go ahead. You're from development.
Oh, so for the way we work is they could either come in, producers come to us and pitch a show directly to, the original scripted drama team, or they go in through the digital group, who also are part of the content team, but we're together but separate. So what happens is, like, Chris Jericho came in through the digital content because the producers were wanting to access the IFP, right?
Right.
So they get a lot of these kinds of applications for both the IFP and the Bell Fund, and they sift through them, and they pick 1 or 2 dramas maybe a year, or scripted things a year, I should say. And then they bring them to us, and we talk about them. Will it work for us? Is it something that we see that could possibly move into the linear space, or will it just live on digital? So it's just a regular pitching process for us if it's an original. In terms of acquisitions, it would go through our acquisitions team. I don't believe they buy things that are strictly digital at the moment. But yeah, it's the traditional way for us. Yeah.
It's similar to CTV. For anybody who's familiar with the pitch and development process at a broadcaster like CTV, it's exactly the same thing and using the same context. But now, over the last couple of years, they've expanded their scope to include looking for digital projects and some things that have come in looking for a television home may actually fit better under a different way for digital. And then as far as acquisitions go, that typically comes straight to me and my department.
Okay. Broadcasters are in the middle of a disruptive moment right now. We've got non-traditional broadcasters like Netflix, YouTube, Amazon getting themselves into the heart of traditional television. And then we've got all this non-video content suddenly finding a home on the television in the family. How do broadcasters compete when there's this world of multi-genre content being offered and there's only so many hours in a day?
I think we just need to be there, and that's part of some of the initiatives in terms of things like smart TVs and being on platforms like the Xbox, so the home entertainment. So something like the Xbox, which started as a gaming console, is now much more of a home entertainment system. So companies are building apps and putting those on those platforms to try and get the attention of folks who don't and have never or will not subscribe to television in the traditional way, but just trying to. The idea is to try to be everywhere, as opposed to the traditionally where you would create your property, your channel, your website as that walled garden and trying to pull people in. Now I think it's more about getting out there and finding basically fishing where the fish are, and trying to be in all those different places.
Can you talk a little bit more about that phrase, content everywhere, and maybe how it's different from digital first, because I think that's something that gets confused quite often.
Yeah, so from a broadcaster perspective, when we say content everywhere, we're mainly talking about something like our TV Everywhere product. So we launched CTV Go not too long ago, just after Shaw Go. And so the Canadian broadcasters, for the most part, are adopting a similar playbook as what we've seen in the US, where it's a matter of putting not only our VOD content on our apps, for instance, which we've always done, but now with your cable subscription, being able to log in and watch a live stream, for instance. So that's what we mean by the content everywhere, as opposed to a digital first, which is, for at least for CTV, it's something like CTV Extend, which we started in April, where we're looking to commission and acquire web series and exclusive digital content specifically for the site and to augment traditional broadcast assets.
Okay. And that can be stuff that is related to programming that's currently on your traditional channels, or absolutely new, fresh content.
Yeah. So what we've done with CTV Extend, we've done those two major buckets. And so the first is what we call our companion content. And so we've done a short-run web series for programs like Saving Hope and The Listener and Motive. But then also bundling that together with exclusive digital stuff, things that we've commissioned like Backpackers a couple of years ago, and then other acquisitions like Blue and the new spin-off series from the Veronica Mars movie that's launching on Monday.
Anything to add?
No.
Can the public sustain this? There's a lot of content everywhere. There's a lot of stuff that's out there, and you see even bloggers that are setting up their own paywalls. Is there really a space for everyone to play?
We believe so.
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely there is a space for everyone to play. And we haven't really talked a ton about YouTube, but I mean, if you see what kind of is going on with the multi-channel networks in the U.S. and actually everywhere, but like YouTube has people who are stars who have never been on linear television, but have built their own networks online and have 30 million subscribers and make more than $1 million a year in revenue, and these people may never go to linear. And I mean, I think that's a perfect example of how there is space for everyone.
And I know a lot of those people are now kind of being lured just because of the intersection of social media,
Right.
with traditional broadcast. How do we use social media as content makers to kind of push the branding of our shows into the digital world?
Social media is really important to us, and it's so important in fact, that every show that we have that is a commissioned show, they have someone either on their team or they hire an outside company to control their social media. So they're always on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever, and they're constantly going. So even though a new episode of, say, Lost Girl hasn't aired since the spring, people are still talking about it every day online. And that's the way we keep the interest going. Instead of leading viewers away between seasons, we hope we can hang on to them more, maybe give them bits of extra content in between and point it to them through social media. In fact, this is the last season of Lost Girl, and we announced the last season of Lost Girl via Twitter. So Anna Silk, the star, posted a video on Twitter announcing directly to the fans that this will be the last season. And it has a huge fan base, and they're very vocal. So we were a bit worried about what the backlash would be and all that kind of stuff. But because we spoke to them directly and treated them with the kind of respect that they felt they deserved, we got nothing but great. I mean, people were sad, but they were very appreciative that we were able to talk to them one-on-one. And that was something we learned very early in Lost Girl, because it premiered 4 years ago this month. So social media was just starting to build. And so we took notice of it very quickly, and we sort of used it and experimented with it and see how it would work. And in fact, there were a couple of super fans who would tweet every day multiple things. And so when we were launching Continuum, which is another genre series, what we did was we sent a screener about a month in advance to a couple of those people who we thought were super fans. And we said, this is our new show, want you to take a look, what do you think? And they watched it, and we thought they would love it, and they did. And then they started tweeting about it like months before we started advertising it. So we use social media to sort of get the word out in advance about new stuff.
Yeah.
But you have to be very careful about what way you do it, because people are very savvy. They know when they're being advertised to, and they know when they're being talked to.
Right, and I think that's the very thin line that you always have to observe, because if it feels like a sales pitch, it can actually push your audience away.
Exactly.
What sort of following do you have on Twitter for Lost Girl? Do you know?
I would have to look at the Twitter.
Okay.
It's in the hundreds of thousands.
Wow,
And I know it's several 100,000 fans on Facebook.
that's pretty
And
impressive.
because that's international, right? It's not just Canada, because social media transcends those boundaries. Whereas, all the digital stuff that we do to augment the series, we only have the Canadian rights to those, and those are geo-blocked.
Right.
But social media is worldwide. So there are super fans in France and in Belgium. I have so many followers from Portugal and Brazil that I never would ever expect on Twitter, but it's because of Lost Girl.
Right, and it all sort of feeds the show here in Canada. Interestingly enough, Netflix acquired Lost Girl.
Yes.
How important is social media to Netflix? I mean, in the time that you were there.
I think social media is very important. I think it kind of varies depending on the show, but certainly when we acquire shows like Lost Girl, you're tweeting things, or you guys may have seen with House of Cards and like some of the original shows, there are tweets when the seasons are dropped. There are tweets just kind of talking about what storylines might be coming. There are tweets just to kind of generate interest. So I think social media is a very important component of how marketing is done.
Right. And over at Bell Media?
Yeah, same. And this came up briefly in the panel yesterday, but I think it bears repeating. One of the things that we're seeing is a breakdown of the old model in which producers would produce a show, deliver it to the network, and then be done with it. And then it was up to the network really to take the responsibility for promotion and getting it out there and distributing it. Whereas we just can't do that. We're not close enough to the content, to the stories, to the characters, and really to provide that authentic conversation. I think the fans are looking for, and so that's where we're looking for producers to take more of that active role, not only during the production, but all the time throughout.
Oh yeah.
I just checked, and it's actually only 70,000 Twitter followers for the actual Lost Girl account. But there's also the Lost Girl fan account. There's also the Lost Girl writers Twitter account. So
Right.
yeah,
Right. So it adds up.
it adds up.
And because we're sort of seeing content spread out in a number of ways across a number of platforms, how is this affecting the notion of ratings? How do you quantify success in a digital age, especially since we can't get numbers from OTTs? So how do we deal with that?
For us, at least, it's the long tail, as I keep saying. It's not a number of conversations I've had here. I've been talking about the TV notion of simultaneous audience and getting as many people to watch a particular program at a particular time on a particular night. That just doesn't work for an OTT and a digital model, because we don't necessarily need everybody to be there at the same time. And so when we're looking specifically even with digital acquisitions and digital commissions, we're okay to get a constant number of people over the life of the project. And that may take 2 years, it may take 3 years, it may take 5 years, but that's where we need to be a little bit more patient in terms of evaluating something and whether it's quote unquote a success or not.
So I would actually even go back to the previous question about social media. So I know one of the things that is a bit of a metric for success or even acquisition at the Netflixes, the Amazons, the Hulu is how many Twitter followers are there, how many Facebook fans are there, and those are certainly criteria that are looked at when people are looking at buying new content. And 70,000 for Lost Girl is it's kind of amazing. So I definitely would go back to social media as even an indicator of success.
So is that what producers need to do in order to sort of raise their budget in season 2? We need to really show the social media numbers?
Obviously, there's more than that, but yes, I think absolutely. I mean, even going back to what I was talking about specific to YouTube earlier, we talked about this a little earlier, but one of the things that YouTube does is if you are a producer and a creator of content and you get to a certain number of subscribers, then what they'll do is they'll give you full access to their production facilities, so then you can shoot things. And right now they have labs in New York and labs in LA that are free of charge. So there's an example right there of how you kind of get a little further in the production process. So I think that stuff absolutely does matter.
Right. I just want to throw back to Greg maybe to talk about the notion of how do you measure success with your content.
It's really dollars and cents, because it's either direct ad revenue or it's it's direct sales, EST sales and VOD sales. And I think one of the it came up about numbers and Vimeo. And I think a lot of times, I'll say it, I won't reflect any, but it's all relative. What could be good, a hit for me would be a rounding error for Harvey Weinstein. I think the other reluctance to talk about numbers is that it'd probably scare everyone in the audience and they'd want to go into other careers. It's like, and I don't think that there's room for everyone, and it's not people are talented. I just like, our lives are still bound by 24/7, and you only have so much time to consume stuff. There's everything that has ever been shot in film will be made available digitally in our lifetime. Just think, you're never going to get through all the books you want to read, which is unfortunate. So just take that video, and this conversation 10 years from now, there's going to be even more content. So there's more content growing faster than population. Your time is not growing. So everything's going to be slanted towards new releases will be slanted towards new releases, and there'll be a very stark drop rate, and then you will have an ever-increasing thin long tail. So in terms of numbers, we just look at sales. I'll reiterate the importance of social media, because our partners, along the production process, we're trying to break through that top spot on Hulu and get promotion, which makes a huge impact on sales. On Apple, same thing. So the people at these platforms are looking, all right, what have they done? How many followers do they have? How many trailer loads have there been on Vimeo or on YouTube? So they want to know when they're going to back a property, because there's just too much stuff coming in the door. So so that's a long. I come back to sales. We measure by dollars and cents. Now, how you get there is a whole other conversation. But in terms of evaluating things and reiterating what we heard from Netflix and Hulu, they do look at a social footprint and as one bellwether of how popular a series might be.
Okay. The trend that we talked about at the start, binge watching versus appointment television, this means the viewers are actually going to go away. Viewers are preferring to sort of watch stuff in their own time. Interestingly enough, Shaw has just announced its own version of an OTT. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about that.
Okay, so it kind of goes back to, well, a couple of questions actually. So in terms of, do we think there's enough room out there for more players? We do. And the cutting the cord question. So because we believe that we know about 80% of Netflix subscribers in Canada are stackers. And the primary complaint about Netflix in Canada is that the content is quite old. And it's much more limited than it is in the US or even in the UK. And that's because broadcasters, have acquired those rights and are holding on to those rights for, the duration of the license period in Canada. So Shaw Media and Rogers have sort of come together and created Show Me, which is, people call it OTT, but technically it'll be through your set-top box. So it's subscriber-based. You go in, and it'll have a similar kind of idea experience as Netflix in that all the content will be there. You will get to choose to watch what you want, when you want. The primary differences will be it's much more recent content. So when something, I believe, it'll air on something that airs on Global or Showcase on a Sunday night, on Monday, it'll be available on Show Me.
Including full back episodes.
Full back episodes, so the full back library. So I think they said we have about 10,000 hours right now and available between the two broadcasters. So, and that's just gonna grow. And it will also, they'll use things like algorithms like Netflix uses to figure out what you want to watch to recommend stuff, but also we'll have human curators who will go in and look at this stuff and try to actually refine it even more. And we'll have guest curators who will come in and say, these are my 10 favorite shows, you should be watching them right now, and stuff like that. So it's a little bit more of an experience.
So it's interesting because it's not technically an OTT because it's actually coming through your cable service. It's
Correct.
not coming through the internet.
So it doesn't suck up your bandwidth the same way that Netflix does.
Oh, net neutrality.
Yeah.
Are we seeing similar things happening in the States with the American broadcasters?
Similar things in terms of those kind of services being created. I think the biggest one that I can think of is Comcast StreamPix. So they do have content that's available that's to non-subscribers, but the great content that you're going to get is available. You have to be a Comcast subscriber. So TBD if other MVPDs will do that. I think Comcast is certainly a leader. Perhaps.
And CTV?
No comment.
To be announced. I think, what we're going to do is open up to the floor, just to see if we got any questions so far. Right over here, yes.
I wanted to go back to something you said earlier about those who are finding doing the piracy online are a much younger audience. In the UK, what I find is we don't get the shows so early, and so I find even my age group, which isn't in that spectrum, you'll be shocked to hear, but the 30s and 40s, they will go and seek that content online because they're such fans, they want to get it now. And I'm wondering whether television, do you think they're going to move to a day and date model like some of the feature films? Do you think that's something that's going to possibly happen?
Wow. And just speaking personally, and not necessarily on behalf of Bell Media, I think at some point we need to recognize what those realities and the way that people can get that content now, and they're choosing to bypass. They're so anxious, and there's such a demand for it that they're willing to bypass the traditional means just to get it sooner. So I really think it's on us to, again, to understand that behavior and provide and respond and provide some sort of service for that. Because the horse is out of the barn at this point in terms of VOD, watch whenever and however and wherever you are. So I don't. That's my own opinion, but I think we need to be responsive to it.
When you say day and date, do you mean every country in the world airing it at exactly the same time, or available on digital the exact same time as?
I mean, I guess both. I know it's probably an impossible task for television stations, but I think certainly in the UK, that market's getting cannibalized by those people who really are an addict to the show, and then you're finding that we're not going to get it for several months. So they will, that older audience, which isn't necessarily one that are pirating films, will go out for those television series because they've become addicts, you know.
Well, I mean, a lot of that, it depends on whether or not international broadcasters are going to be willing to take a chance on an unknown entity. I know Lost Girl was a little bit difficult to sell internationally off the top until it was a huge hit on Showcase. And then immediately they started buying it. And by then it was too late to be day and date. So whether or not, they could correct that in later seasons going forward, I don't know why they can't do that. I mean, I do know there are several reasons why they don't do that. Most of it is budgetary. But yeah, you would think that would be the natural progression of things.
Interestingly enough, it seems like that is the advantage of the OTTs, and Netflix kind of prides itself on releasing House of Cards across North America. I'm not sure if they do it in Europe as well, day and date.
All the shows get kind of dropped at the same time.
The same time, yeah.
But they can only do that for the content that they create.
Exactly. And different territories will have different licenses when they'll be able to air stuff. Any other questions? A couple over here. We're going to get to financing too. I'm curious to know if there's people in the room that have been able to finance things in creative ways, because that seems to be the big question on producers' minds these days, funding of digital content. Go ahead.
So if you could actually elaborate a little bit more on Nielsen's ratings. You mentioned how the value of social websites and social media is actually important to you. How does that factor into your decision making as far as whether or not you're going to continue to renew a program? I know Nielsen's has undergone a whole reinvention of a company as far as how they track social media. I'm curious as a content creator as far as what kind of value added I can do, and when, as an example, Friday Night Lights was a series that was constantly under the axe, but because of the fan base and critical acclaim, it just kept getting renewed, despite the fact that the ratings weren't there. So if you can elaborate a little bit on that, that'd be great.
There are a couple of shows like that, like Friday Night Lights. Fringe was that way for a long time. Those are prestige kind of shows. Mad Men, is not a rating success by any means. It's not huge, but it is a prestige show. So, and subscriber-based cable channels require those to promote the channel, because they need subscribers to come and actually keep them afloat. So they need those prestige shows to keep them out in the public eye, and the demand for the actual channel. I mean, I think a lot of people subscribe to AMC for Mad Men, but stay for something else. For us, because I'm not going to bore you with all kinds of revenue talk, but because it comes from different sources and that kind of things, we can have a little more space to play on the cable side. Not as much as we used to, because we are more advertiser driven than we used to be. Social media is great. Digital success is fantastic, but it comes down to dollars and cents, and whether or not this show is a drain on the company. It comes down to those kinds of questions, and they're brutal questions, to have to ask, because there's shows that you love and you wish you could keep them on the air forever and a day, but in the real world, it's not a possibility. So we look very closely at ratings, we still do. Whatever you think of the Nielsen system, you know, everyone has their own opinion, but we're beholden to the advertiser dollar in the real world. So in the TV space, it's a very big concern for us.
And if I can add to that, I think it's that distinction between a subscriber model and an ad-supported model, which is where the networks are. And so when it comes to Nielsen ratings, that's what our advertisers look at when they're making their buying decisions. And quite often, we won't even get, if the numbers are too low, we won't even have the conversation. We won't have any opportunity to sell that on any other merit other than its audience. And so typically what we're finding is that buyers are simply just drawing a line at a certain threshold of audience. And again, those that fall above that are the ones that get the dollars, and those that fall below, again, don't even get the conversation. And so those are the realities that we live in today. I think it's shifting somewhat, but things like social media that's the conversation again that we're not quite having, because those kinds of numbers aren't being necessarily factored into straight up ratings.
Yeah, and Nielsen, I mean, they are shifting and they are adjusting, because now we don't really pay attention to overnight ratings so much anymore. I mean, they're fantastic, but we look at the +7 numbers. So if you've PVR'd that show and you've watched it within 7 days, those are the numbers that we take out to advertisers, and those are the numbers they want to see.
So the +7 numbers are the new standard.
Those are the new standard, yeah, here in Canada, yeah.
I actually just have a quick question. I'm wondering what the acronym OTT stands for.
Over the top.
We should
It
start
just
with
means
that.
over the top. It just basically means that anything that you're getting not through your cable provider, so you get it through the internet, over the top.
Such as Netflix, Amazon, Hulu.
Roku.
Yep. That kind of service.
Apple TV.
Yep. Any other questions? Here and here.
The +7, why do you stop at +7, given the propensity for people to binge watch? I'm just wondering, I mean, personally, sometimes series that I love, I will wait 3 weeks, or I'm on the road, and then I will binge watch something that's on Global. You know,
to be honest, I don't know. I'm assuming it's been a discussion between the broadcasters and the advertisers and Nielsen. You know, it's these conversations that happen far beyond my realm of comprehension.
It's part that. So it's very much a part of it anyway, is part of an advertising conversation, and that it's a way for us to show that we're still delivering audience value to advertisers 7 days after, and quite often the advertising isn't all that relevant past 7 days. And so but I mean, it's in other respects, I think it's the first step, right? And it needed to go beyond the overnights to a +7. And so in some ways, I think in my mind, it goes much beyond that. It's probably 7. It's probably plus, I don't know, 100 or something. But the fact that we get to +7 is a win as far as I'm concerned.
It is. It's a big win for us.
Yeah, and I would just add in the U.S. perspective, it's brand new, right? Like it started with +3, like that was the standard, and now it's moving on to +7. So I think people are still just trying to figure out what's the best way to go.
Right.
It'll be +365 in 5 years. Long tail.
Yeah.
Right.
Another question here?
So, kind of jumping on that topic, in the U.S., obviously, in-season stacking is a big issue with regards to OTT services and license fees that Netflix or Amazon is paying. Curious what conversation is happening here in Canada in regards to that, or non-exclusive first windows with OTT services, and how that might affect license fees or budgets.
It's a good question.
That is a good question. I don't know. I'm not aware in our company of those kinds of conversations, so It's a very good question. I have, the honest truth is I don't know.
Same answer.
Faye?
I will just say from my time at Netflix and working and trying to work on deals with Canada and trying to work on deals for stacking, it was very complicated because I think the strategy hadn't been fully formed and people were holding back the rights, so Netflix wasn't necessarily doing a lot of being able to acquire a lot of content to stack. So it sounds like, yeah, it's definitely still in flux and people are still deciding.
There's only a certain period where the Canadian broadcaster holds on to the, like SVOD is one thing because those fall under the broadcast rights, but in terms of like EST, like and home video or e-rental, like we only have a holdback for a certain period that we can sustain. So I mean, broadcasters are making those seasons, prior seasons available. I mean, you can see that's why they're all over Netflix.
Yeah, and I actually am aware of 2 Canadian series that currently have serious OTT interest, and I've been told the broadcasters are being fairly flexible in accommodating that. So I actually think it's a great source of financing, and God only knows, like, they're drying up. So if we can find that, if we can find a way to bring that in to get our content made, we'll be making better and higher priced content, I think.
Right. I mean, when we see a financing plan for an original show, we love to see a Netflix sale to the US. We love to see that. And we love to see a sale to a cable channel. So we know that the producers are doing the groundwork, they're doing their homework, and that these are acquisitions that they're just going to pay money for, and they don't want, creative input, which is ideal for us. But we will not accept a Netflix Canada window in Canada at the moment for our programming.
So can we talk a little bit about financing? This is always the big question. What are the models of financing? How are they evolving? What are you guys? I know all of you aren't necessarily in the sort of crux of raising financing or dealing with financing, but what are some models that you've been seeing, and how do you see those models evolving?
For digital?
For digital, yeah.
Well, certainly there are a lot of great funds in Canada, like the IFP and the Bell Fund and other places you can go to, and we do support those. If you bring something to us, we are very particular about what we will support. Mm-hmm. There's a kind of derogatory term in the industry called fund chasers, where people will just apply to every fund and someone will support them at every fund. And we refuse to do that. We actually will sit down and go through the creative and make sure it is right for us. So we actually only support a few things every year. And my colleague, Zach Feldberg, who oversees that kind of stuff for Showcase.ca and all our digital channels, we work very closely with him to find out what's right. And he brings us a lot of stuff, and we talk back and forth. And we bring him stuff all the time as well. So funds, yes. Producers usually put up some of it themselves, and often, we do have some digital money to spend, so usually we'll put in at least the minimum, of course, but often we go above the minimum and support it more than that.
Mm-hmm. Faye?
Oh, I'm not passing it down to Chris. I'll primarily defer to the gentlemen here who have more experience kind of on the funding. I mean, in the U.S., kind of some of the things we've seen internationally as well as, people are doing funding through Kickstarter or through Indiegogo, I think we talked about. I think I previously mentioned kind of the YouTube efforts, although you have to be obviously a little further down. You're not getting the funding from kind of the outset once you get a certain number of followers. So those are kind of what I've seen, but funding is not, and finance is not my specialty, so I don't want to say that there are not other opportunities. I just want to kind of limit.
And I always leave out the CMF, which has a lot of digital funding available.
Mm-hmm. So. Yep. Branding, is that something that we're seeing a move towards?
Yeah, and and not surprisingly, as a Canadian broadcaster, it's very similar to what Stephen described in terms of funding for us and the things that we see. But brand integrations is the other component that is a little bit more nebulous, especially at the up front. But it's the kind of things, at least on digital, we understand that the economics are such that we need other sources of income and revenue, so that we have our own brand partnerships group that tries to help connect those dots in the same way that we would for a TV series, but go out there and pitch and present the digital components as well.
Any shows you can speak to that have successfully been able to engage with brands on Shaw or Bell Media?
Not digitally, or on digital rather, but a couple years ago we did a show called Crash and Burn, and there was a very healthy integration with Nissan, because they were launching the Cube at the time, and the production, which was basically about insurance claims adjusters who would go and investigate, what have you. So there was a natural integration where they needed cars. So they all drove Nissan Cubes, which are instantly identifiable, right? So that worked out really well for them. And a couple years before that, CBC did one with Kia, when Kia was launching in Canada. One of the characters on the tournament was a Kia salesman, and that was like seamless. It was very well done.
So car companies seem to be playing in this space. That's a good note to producers.
Car companies for sure, and we haven't had the same kind of success for our scripted programming, but like Chevrolet was a big sponsor for the Amazing Race Canada, and so we did a fairly significant digital extension in the first season, and Chevrolet featured prominently.
I was just going to add one from a digital perspective. I don't recall the network that it's with, but their Ballpark Hot Dog Franks was doing a series with one of the networks on barbecue and kind of grilling, and so they're basically doing 6 12-minute episodes that are, obviously funded via Ballpark Franks and that are airing digitally, but it's via partnership with a linear network. So.
Right. It seems like it's a kind of space that you can almost, more easily find partnerships.
Absolutely.
Yeah, as far as, whether it's location-based or, product-based, much more open to doing it than traditional drama.
Yeah.
Certainly my experience of it.
Yeah.
Questions here? Any more questions? I'm going to wrap things up by asking you guys, where are we headed? What's the landscape going to look like 5 years down the road? What do you see happening in Canada and internationally even?
I think we end up in a place where we are providing more choice, more selection, more options, more opportunity, more of an open system for viewers to find what they're looking for. And much more so than it is now. We're just trying to figure out how to make that work as a business.
I would agree in terms of more choice. I think that you'll probably see different formats kind of doing well on different platforms. Obviously, like when I think of comedy and things that have done well digitally, like those have gone together really well. So while you may see it a little less on linear, I think you'll see a lot more proliferation and then just more opportunities to do kind of new and creative things digitally, and I think that there'll still be this interplay between traditional television, linear, and then digital. I don't think that linear is going to go away.
Traditional television isn't going anywhere, is where you're...
Not in the next 5 years. Not in the next 5 years.
No, and once again, I have to agree with both of them. I mean, we as broadcasters have to be as innovative and as nimble as we can, and just listen to what people want, and that's what that's where Show Me came from. This is the type of content that people want. This is how they want to see it. And they want to be the ones in control. And, there's a whole generation of kids, like Netflix kids, who have no concept of what a channel is, what an airing time is, all that kind of stuff. So there's a whole generation that's coming up that's going to have virtually no concept of the TV that we grew up with. So we're going to have to be ready for them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that we're already, well, I'm certainly seeing, a number of my nieces who are very curious about that thing called a channel changer when they come over to my place.
Yeah. Is this a phone?
I think that's going to be it, unless there's any more burning questions. Thank you all very much. You've been a very agreeable panel this morning.
Yeah. Sorry to be so boring and Canadian about it.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Damon and